Hi, and welcome back to the second day of the Northern Ireland Travel News Virtual Forum in association with Jet2holidays, our Kickstart to Recovery. For anyone that wasn't with us yesterday, I had to explain that the hope was at this stage that we would be able to return to our live events. But safety has always been our #1 priority, so we will have to wait until August and the big event before we can get together. Our plan over the coming week is to cover the important topics with a priority on helping the whole industry in Northern Ireland and to see the brighter future ahead and hear from the principals that will help that recovery. We at Northern Ireland Travel News, of course, are delighted to facilitate this event, but of course this is only made possible with the generosity of our sponsor, Jet2holidays, a company that has been at the forefront in helping both the agents and their clients over the past year. We'd like now to introduce a short message from our sponsor, Mr. Alan Cross.
So it's day 2 of the Northern Ireland Travel News Virtual Travel Forum, and I really hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Now, the Jet2holiday team are always looking for innovative ways to interact with you and your customers. Virtual visits, virtual key account meetings, virtual knowledge sessions, and of course, virtual holiday shows. Competitions, including the very popular I'm a Celebrity, Come Book With Me, which ran for 3 months. And the latest is #BoostMySocial, which will guide you on how to get the most out of social media. Most importantly, we've ran a full trade team of 14 right through the pandemic. So if you want to catch up to discuss working closer, don't hesitate to call Kat, Simon, Lloyd, or myself. Anyway, it's time to get started. So from all the Jet2holiday trade team, enjoy.
Thank you, Alan. Really appreciate all the support, not just to us, but also the travel trade in Northern Ireland and all their clients. Now, today's session is one of the most eagerly anticipated, covering some of the most emotive topics during this pandemic. And we are delighted to have the support and input from all the team at ABTA and the CAA for this session. Let me introduce our wonderful panel for the Finance and Security session. Day 2, Finance and Security session with Rachel Jordan, the Director of Financial Protection from ABTA, Ian Hall, Head of Insurance from ABTA, John DeVille, Director of Membership from ABTA, and Michael Budge, who is Head of Operations, Aviation and Travel, Finance and Licensing at the CAA. Good morning and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us here for our second day of the Kickstart to Recovery in association with Jet2holidays. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. As you know, it's been a horrendous 14 months for all of us, and more so for you guys. You've been right at the coalface of everything that's been going on. So thank you very much for taking the time to give a bit of a confidence message to our agents moving forward. We'll start off with our first question, and this one's for you, John. Travel agents and the industry as a whole were put in some terrible positions with customers during the last year. What areas can be addressed in the short or medium term?
Yeah, good morning, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone out there. Good to be in touch, even if it's in this virtual world, and it'd be good to see you all again later in the year. Yeah, it's been horrendous, hasn't it, Jonathan? It's been unprecedented is probably been an overused phrase through this whole crisis, but it's probably the right phrase. None of us have ever seen anything like this, and I think looking at it from a customer perspective, I think we've seen a real range of reactions from actually an astonishing amount of understanding and recognition of the impact on the industry. And actually, you know, a lot of real loyalty to the great brands in membership in your region and, you know, across the UK, which has been fantastic. I think there's been a level of understanding, flexibility from consumers that, you know, reflects that understanding of the impact across the whole of society and economy, which has been amazing. And of course, as ever, we have seen less patient and less understanding reactions from consumers, and probably less, definitely less understanding reactions from some journalists as well. It probably is no surprise, and I don't think it means anything has gone wrong when you get something of this seriousness and this duration and our normal systems of business as an industry aren't geared up to deal with that, can't cope with it. You know, I think we need to learn from that, but it's not really that anything has gone disastrously wrong. It is just quite extraordinary, and quite extraordinary that it's gone on for as long as it has. So I find it a bit of a contradiction, to be honest. I look at all aspects of this, the refunds issue, as many companies got their processes together with reduced staffing, with furlough, with the challenges of technology, and came through with refunds. Did they take, in many cases, whether we're talking about our members or airlines, perhaps longer sometimes in some cases to get everything together to make that work? Yeah, sure. And many other companies done an absolutely fantastic job throughout the entire crisis, and will have you know, achieved some really great brand loyalty and recognition from their customer base as a result of that. So I think lots of lessons to be learnt, but equally I think the industry has come good for the consumer on the whole. We've been able to maintain those systems of protections. Refunds have come through despite some of the behaviours. You know, the airlines have been particularly, or I should say some of the airlines have been particularly difficult in that area, and that has come down through the whole supply chain, affected both principal members, tour operators and travel agents, and therefore ultimately the consumer. I think we have to be careful not to build future systems and processes on the back of what we all hope to be a 1 in 50, 1 in 100, I don't know statistically what the scientists would say it is, but event that's so exceptional, so extraordinary, that you know, realistically, you're not necessarily trying to build industry structures to be able to deal with that. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't impose on the industry, on our members, costs on that basis. I don't think that would be the right answer either. So as I think, you know, we work through this session, we'll touch on some of the issues and some of the things that we've got to consider. But I think, you know, industry should take a lot of credit for what has been achieved in the most exceptional of circumstances.
Yeah, it came as a bit of a shock to everyone, and no one could anticipate this. And you know, and like you say, the systems were there in place, but they couldn't have ever coped with the amount that happened all at one time. So
Yep.
yeah, it's been very, very difficult. Michael, would you like to add anything to that?
I would, thank you, and a good morning. Even after what 12-13 months, it always takes me a little bit of time to come off mute. Great to be here, and thank you for your invite. I mean, I concur with a lot of what John has already said. I mean, you know, the impact here has been, you know, people characterise it many different ways, but it has been, you know, staggering. It has been, you know, immense, and it has been, you know, both financially and mentally challenging for everyone across the industry. And our perspectives have been focused on outcomes for the consumers across the entire period. But throughout that time, we've had ongoing discussion and dialogue with the industry, which has demonstrated the challenges, but also, as John sort of set out, the ways in which businesses have sought to look to overcome that. And systems and data, which we might come to talk about a little bit later on, have proved to be a challenge, certainly for some, particularly when they're operating on lower staff numbers and looking to manage their resource accordingly. But we have seen businesses push out the refunds, and we have also seen the airlines managing that as well. And as John sort of set out, you know, there have been some airlines that have refunded on a very sort of timiest, you know, very quick basis, and there have been others that have been, you know, much slower to push out the refunds. But of course, the pandemic in the early days was overwhelming for everyone, and that's not to make excuses, but certainly it was overwhelming, and the need to gear up and suddenly find a way to effectively reverse everything that, you know, you'd been doing overnight becomes incredibly difficult. You know, we sought to act to put in place various commitments with airlines that we felt weren't meeting their obligations, you know, in terms of refunds, and that did secure good outcomes. And that's not looking to be complacent, because we still recognise that there are consumers out there that have had a challenging time in getting their refund, or perhaps still having a challenging time to get their refund. But of course, the scale has been astronomical, and that is also one of the reasons why, and sort of thinking ahead to things to address, we have publicly called on the government, and they actually announced in the recent task force report week before last that they will be looking at pushing out additional powers to the CAA to improve our ability to enforce and to provide a more flexible enforcement toolkit to, manage situations, not necessarily like this, as John said. I mean, how often would you see an event like this happening? But to manage situations and events by which you need to make sure that the consumer actually doesn't have to go through the same level of challenges that it has previously. And we've been very clear that our powers are relatively cumbersome and time consuming if we have to act under the Enterprise Act. And I think the fact that government has clearly come out and said that it will look to address that and will set out further clarity on that in later on this year is welcome, and certainly puts us in a better position to be managing issues down the line, because consumer confidence, as we all know here, and clarity for consumers moving forward and to encourage them to book is extremely important, particularly because everyone's been impacted so significantly. We need to make sure that the booking public understand exactly where they are, they understand their consumer protection, and of course then the industry, the agents, the tour operators and the airlines can appropriately communicate that to the consumers as well as to other stakeholders across the industry.
Absolutely, very good. We'll move on to question 2 now, and this is back to you again, Michael. The area of risk management needs to be managed to protect agents and operators. And do you see any changes to this in the future?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I do. If you went back 12, 15 months, you would have struggled to have found many businesses or boards sitting around the table planning scenarios and forecasts where their business would effectively be shut for the next 12 to 15 months. There were some large businesses that would sort of think about some scenarios like that, but even not to the extent that we have seen. I think what it has done is it has forced everyone to reflect and become a bit more inward looking as well as outward looking, look at their own ways that they operate, look at really where their potential risks lie in terms of their operating model, their suppliers, the way cash comes in and cash comes out of the business. But I think John was right insofar as what we don't want businesses to do, and you don't want businesses to see them sort of doing, is effectively looking to put together a plan to deal with an event that has already happened. I think now businesses have very well put together systems and structures to deal with the challenges we face at the moment. And of course, there are still many challenges to come. But I think what it will do is it will change the attitude and view to risk, to think more broadly about effectively what other black swan events could come down the line. Do we need to think differently about our systems? Do we need to think differently about our data, the way we communicate with our customers, how we interact with our suppliers, the way we're financed and the way we finance ourselves? And I think particularly those aspects will, I think, force a lot of businesses to rethink the way they want to choose to operate. And that's not to say they have to look to change, but I think it will result in a different perspective and a different view of risk from their side. And also, I think it has resulted in many more businesses putting themselves in the shoes of the customer. A lot of people talk about understanding the customer and the customer experience. Right now the customer experience certainly, sadly, isn't traveling, but is all the other bits, around it. And I think as a result, a lot of people, and particularly agents that I know full well, have been on the front line talking to and interacting with customers, and I'm sure some very difficult conversations on a number of them on a daily basis. But it's forced a lot more other participants in the industry to put themselves in the shoes of the consumer and just think about things from a different perspective, which I think ultimately, and certainly from a regulatory perspective, from our perspective, as we're there to safeguard the consumer, is a good thing.
There's a much more cooperative approach now moving forward. You know, the formation of the future of travel, and one thing there is definitely helped, and everybody having an input into that, and certainly that'll help in the future. John, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with much of, if not all of what Michael said there. I think it has opened everyone's eyes to the kind of mutuality of interest of ultimately looking after the consumer, and the recognition of the amazing job that frontline folk, whether it's within travel agents or tour operators dealing with the consumer, actually do. And frankly, you know, the weight they've carried personally through such an extended period dealing with that. And I think it's, you know, it's all credit to probably all of our listeners on this call. Amazing job done. You know, whether it's refunds, whether it's been, you know, the thankfully relatively small number of failures and fallout from failures so far in this crisis, or really any other aspect of it. It's amazing what people have had to deal with and have coped with. Yeah, I think, again, I'm with Michael on this. I think change is going to be necessary, but I think we should make change for a more resilient, normal business rather than for this past crisis. I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of academic writing, management writing around black swan events, and that's one of the key lessons that you read. Don't react to the one that happened last. Think about the sort of generic resilient structures that would actually serve the unknown future extraordinary events rather than the particular one that's passed, and particularly when you're talking about what I guess probably is statistically, you know, 1 in 50, 1 in 100 year type event. I think we also have to be careful to make the right changes. So, you know, managing risk between tour operators and travel agents, and recognizing the reality of margins in our industry. It's relatively straightforward for us as quasi-regulators, in our case, a regulator in Michael's case, to put in place a belt and braces process of bonding or any other arrangement that covers absolutely anything that moves for the benefit of consumers, agents and operators. But the cost of that could very well be quite disproportionate and speak to other trends that have been affecting our industry for some time, and their competitiveness. So if we load all of those costs just onto our members, onto ATOL license holders, but actually in reality in our modern world, we know that our members are competing with consumers doing their own thing, and a whole new world of technology platform disruptors who don't have those costs. Actually, all we're going to do is make our members less and less competitive, and that's not going to serve the industry well, and ultimately it's not going to serve the consumer well, because it's actually going to end up reducing cost and reducing the scale of the protected industry. So I think we have to be very careful to learn lessons, but not jump to the wrong conclusions that will actually do the industry a disservice through costs and lack of competitiveness in the medium to longer term. I think that is a real danger here, in my opinion, and could lead to the industry being less attractive to investment going forward, which I think would, you know, also be a real mistake. So I think it's the right responses. And you know, when you talk about extraordinary events, normally one would think about things like catastrophe insurance type measures, rather than necessarily whether we talk, I know we'll move on to this, you know, whether it's bonding, trusts or other arrangements, you know, providing at that level 100% cover on everything all the time. It's going to be extraordinarily expensive for the industry, and I feel that insurance type solutions to mitigate some of these risks probably should be one of the components of what we look at going forward. That said, we know that the insurance industry as a whole has not necessarily served either our sector or UK industry terribly well in its response to this crisis. You know, the behaviour of some insurers, again, danger of making another sweeping statement here, not all have been guilty on this, but the response of some insurers in terms of the way they've responded on business interruption covers, particularly on the high street, has been pretty poor and led to the intervention of the Financial Conduct Authority, and you know, with some success in getting premises that had to close and businesses that had to close the cover which they'd always believed they paid for. So I think people's confidence in insurance mechanisms, not just our industry protection mechanisms, has been dented by this. So there's an awful lot to look at, but I think we shouldn't rush to the wrong solutions that could be counterproductive either.
Yeah, a proportionate response is what it's all about. It's not going too far.
Yes.
Move on to question 3 now, and again, back to you again, John, sorry. What is the future for flexible terms and conditions with the financial risk to operators to be taken into account?
I think this is already rapidly emerging as one of the industry's responses to this. We're seeing all sorts of flexible T's and C's being offered temporarily or on a medium-term basis by a number of travel organisers. That's been part of the competitive landscape, way people have responded to this. Some have been able to do that, others have not. Seems to be being well received by the retail trade and by consumers, which is good, and it's part of that rebuilding of confidence. Of course, it's also, for regulators, another layer of complexity as to what the financial risk looks like with each business. The way in which cash is aggregated in member companies has been becoming more complex for quite some time now. You know, it's the days of everyone paying, you know, reasonably consistent deposits at the time of booking, and then, you know, balance at 8 weeks before departure. That's long gone. You know, we've got a lot of online players with full balance collection at time of booking. We've got sectors of our industry collecting balances at, you know, 3 months, even longer in some cases, as well as folk doing a more traditional kind of two months out collection of balances. And now in this crisis, seeing some of those dates being brought closer and closer to departure, hand in hand with that flexibility to give consumers the confidence to book. All great responses, all part of the competitive landscape, but really complex from a financial protection point of view. So kind of standard rate schemes, flat rate APC in the case of ATOL, you know, looks probably less and less logical in that context. And I know CAA are going to be looking at a range of issues, including that going forward. And this applies to us as well with bonding and insurance schemes. You know, how do they take that into account and give those companies that give greater flexibility and reduce payment terms to consumers also the cost benefit and recognition for that, whilst also making sure that the cost of other models, which give the business much greater cash flow benefit on early collection of value, but aggregate large amounts of money in the system, that they are carrying the fair and full cost of that commercial decision. So there's a lot for all of us as regulators to think about, and we need to get that right to make sure that those systems of protection remain cost effective and proportionate. As you quite rightly said, Jonathan, that we don't overreact, but equally that people are carrying the correct costs fairly, and we don't have some of the perhaps cross subsidies that we've got in the system at the moment.
Certainly very complex. Michael, would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd add a couple of points there. Thank you. And I mean, I concur with a lot of what you know, what John has said. I mean, from a consumer perspective, it's great to see the level of sort of flexible terms being offered right now. And as has already been said by both of us, that, you know, the confidence needed to encourage, incentivize, you know, consumers. these flexible terms and conditions, are needed, absolutely needed. The question is whether or not they're going to be with us on a sort of a temporary or a permanent basis. But I suspect, as John was sort of setting out, we will see operators look to move into that arena with more flexible terms and conditions. But they will, to that point about challenging from a financial perspective, from a cash flow perspective, have to consider what implications that has to their own funding arrangements and what that does to, I suppose, consumer customer default risk as well, because the more you're relying on the customer to pay you closer to the time of departure, the more the risk is that the customer pulls out, finds a different offer, and the operator is left with and saddled with a certain cost of which it finds hard to recover. And that's nothing new. I mean, we've seen for a number of years, particularly online operators who offer the low deposit schemes, and other operators who offer the low deposit schemes, and thereby effectively possibly funding some of the initial cost. But of course, then you've got to make sure that you are understanding your financial risk position. So back to this sort of point earlier about risk management. You've really got to get into and understand where your cash is coming in, when it's coming in, and then when it's going out, to make sure that your model is fit for this sort of the consumer demographic. But I do think that flexible terms and conditions will be here to stay in some way, shape, or form. The GTT report also set out this COVID-19 charter around customer rights, which again, yes, that's going to be dealing with measures while COVID is still sort of a prevalent pandemic, but you can expect to see operators that will become sort of innovators and early adopters of that type of arrangement moving forward. And then it's going to be who chooses to follow, and who chooses to follow because they want to or because they need to compete. And as John has set out earlier on, the challenges do become in a relatively low margin industry, how you set yourself up to do that, which comes back to one of the points I was making earlier about re-looking at your own financing structures and financing arrangements. But it does add complications, and I would concur with John's point around, from a regulatory perspective, it does add a number of complications, because not only do you have flexible terms and conditions, but flexible payment models. Gone are the days of people just paying in cash. You've got cash and debit cards, cash and credit cards, you've got direct debits, and you can see other financing schemes starting to come in as well. And then that makes a claims process, if something has gone wrong as well. I mean, we don't want to be talking about the situation where things do go wrong, but from a consumer protection perspective, that makes things more difficult as well. So businesses need to make sure they have the systems set up appropriately to be able to monitor their risk around these different models, and be able to tweak accordingly as they start to see trends emerging, and be able to sort of respond and react to it real time, rather than perhaps when the horse is already sadly bolted.
Lots of complexity and lots of flexibility by the sound of it. There you go. The areas that has been muted about, of course, is trust accounts. I'm going to ask you, Rachel, is this possible?
Thanks for inviting me along today. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah.
I will start off with a hopefully positive, yes, they are possible. The package travel regulations do allow for trust accounts as a form of financial protection, just like bonds and insurance. But whichever method is chosen, the organiser must provide sufficient security to refund all payments made by or on behalf of travellers for any travel service that hasn't been performed as a consequence of the company going out of business. And they also must provide the ability to repatriate the traveller and pay for the traveller's accommodation prior to being repatriated. So to set out our position, we're not against trusts. What we are against is the current type of trust, where not all of the customer's money is in the trust account. And we're beginning to see trust accounts that give the option of holding all customer money, and we are open to looking at those. But there aren't easy answers for about 99% of ABTA members as to how you pass all customer money into a travel account and are able to deal with suppliers in advance as well. So one of the reasons we haven't been able so far to get comfortable with and approve any trust account scheme is that there have been far too many cases in the past of customer funds not actually reaching trust accounts. And there's a couple of quick questions here. So what happens in that scenario? and where is the bond or insurance to cover that risk. The package travel regulations require all monies to be held in trust until the contract's been fully performed, but very few trust accounts fulfill this requirement at the moment, because most allow for the earlier payment of suppliers from that trust account, and some allow for the withdrawal of funds as well in relation to margin and commission. And in this crisis, that has been a major issue. So if we think about the challenges around refunds this year, companies using a trust account that allowed for prepayments to the airline or other suppliers meant that the money had been paid out and was stuck. And if the travel company had failed, the customer money was not fully in the trust account to repay them. So that just protection wasn't fully there. Some customers have suffered a really uncomfortable wait to get a refund for their cancelled holiday, and whether that's from the airline or travel organizer or a travel intermediary. And the reason behind many of those delays has been placed at the doors of suppliers and particular airlines, where refunds have been delayed and in some cases denied, which of course is a nightmare situation for that end customer. So the package travel regulations do recognise there may be a lesser sum in a trust, but then they would require that the organiser has in place insurance under one or more appropriate policies to cover any shortfall of the funds that are held in that trust. And I know there's the existence of SAFI insurance, and that may be one of those insurance policies that are providing what the package travel regulations would require, but that's not sufficient in isolation. And the package travel regulations also require an insurance policy to be in place to cover repatriation and pre-repatriation, there we go, it's very hard to say that, accommodation costs that I was touching on before, and those policies need to be without prohibited conditions. And so some other key questions there are, do the existing trust accounts on offer provide that protection? And have all trust account providers been able to renew their SAFI policies and other insurance policies at adequate levels or at all? And we know there have been challenges in the marketplace during the crisis in the bonding and insurance markets. So there are some real difficulties that members have been experiencing with renewing their bonds or other insolvency insurance policies, not least because underwriters have been seeking additional security and increasing rates. And some companies, unfortunately, have been forced down the trust route by merchant acquirers, and challenges that are going on in that sector as well. So providing the additional challenge security at the moment is a challenge, and it's a drain on liquidity of members, but certainly not more so than tying up 100% of customer prepayments in a trust account. Plus there's fees and premiums that are associated with managing that trust as well. So there's quite a few elements to consider there in terms of feasibility and costs. If we were to be approached with a trust account arrangement that complies with all of the PTR requirements and is set up in a way that we can be confident all of the customer money is fully protected, we'd certainly be open to considering that. And that is what we intend to do and to consult on in the next phase of the crisis and the recovery. Certainly as we're getting that feedback from members, increasing queries around, is there a trust account that we can use? We do want to stay in membership. We're having issues in this market, and what are our possibilities there? And finally, there's some lessons to learn from the crisis. We've touched on some already, but like John said, it would be a mistake to build the post-crisis world to be able to deal with like a 14-month shutdown of our industry and consider that to be normal business. The level of costs involved in doing that would have implications for our members. It would make members uncompetitive, and it wouldn't serve ABTA members well. So there's quite a lot of considerations in all of that. And like I say, we are open to them, but they do need to be compliant with the PTRs, and they need to provide the ultimate protection for the customer. So once we can see that, we'll certainly be open to having conversations around that with our members.
Very good. Michael, would you like to come in on that one?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. I guess I'll probably start before answering your question just by putting a little bit of sort of a conditioner around it, insofar as, and John alluded to this earlier on, the CAA is shortly looking to release a consultation, effectively looking at sort of a reform of its ATOL licensing approach, and as part of that, it will be consulting upon trust accounts as a tool of consumer protection. That's one thing that we will be setting out. So I think in setting out my sort of answer to your question in a second, that's not me setting out that the CA has already got a predetermined view of its consultation and the route it's going down. That's absolutely not the case. We will be seeking industry and stakeholder feedback across all the aspects of this consultation, which we'll be releasing shortly. And I think I would also add to that this consultation isn't a knee-jerk reaction to the last 12, 13 months we've seen of the pandemic. Yes, there have been things that we've all learned, and we've talked about some of that this morning, that we've learned, that we've factored into our thinking. But this consultation underpins aspects that we've been considering it within the system for a longer period and reflect lessons learned from the Thomas Cook crisis and collapse, and before that as well. So if it wasn't for the pandemic of the last sort of 12, 13 months, actually this consultation probably would have been far more advanced, but obviously resources have been directed elsewhere in managing the challenges that we've all faced over the period. But as I say, it's not a reaction to the current situation. But in answer to the question, are they possible? Yes, is the short answer. And coming at it from a slightly different sort of perspective than Rachel is, we already have and operate, well, we don't operate them, but there are ATOL holders that are operating trust accounts that the CA is content with, both by way of the accredited body scheme, that have been operating trust accounts for a number of years, and also individual license holders operating trust accounts. But actually stepping back from that, I mean, there are trust accounts and there are trust accounts. I think that's partly what Rachel was alluding to. And actually the sort of the construct and the operation is the sort of the important bit, and there's the detail behind it. And certainly from a consumer perspective, consumers might interpret trust account one way or other. They might sort of think back to solicitors and holding funds when they're moving house, etc. So all of the way that they're set up is extremely important. But actually, the bigger principle here is segregation, and the segregation of customers' money. And a trust account is one way in which of doing that. But ultimately, it comes back to sort of a kind of a principle, almost a sort of a behavioural principle of segregating the money that the hard-earned consumer has parted to pay for their holiday in X number of months, hopefully, time. And of course, a trust account is one way of segregating that. But in the sort of the current operating model of sort of commingling, the funds, they effectively get they get lost, or it's harder for a business to have the visibility over that, and that's certainly an aspect that that we see. And so I think that the segregation is the kind of the critical thing. Yes, the terms and conditions and how the trust account operates, of course, are really important, and the factors that Rachel talked about. But ultimately, segregating monies leads to businesses thinking about their financing in a different way, and setting up financing that is appropriate to manage both the operating costs of the business and the need to provide the service for the consumer. And it's looking at those things through two different lenses. And trust accounts is one way in which they can that can be achieved. Do recognise that there are challenges, and Rachel's alluded to some of those challenges insofar as different business models are perhaps more or less suited to trust accounts as they're currently operated at the moment, based upon particular payment terms they may have with suppliers and the time at which they pay their suppliers. They may pay their suppliers once the customer has returned home, therefore making a fully segregated trust account whereby you're holding all the funds until the customer has returned home, easier to manage from a working capital perspective. But I think I also kind of recognise that, as we've seen with this crisis, that the industry is going to be looking across the entire supply chain and looking at all the different sort of stakeholders that are within that, and how certain aspects across that might also change and okay, that may also take time, but could also deliver certain aspects around a trust account model. But data and technology, I think, will play a big part as well, because we've seen huge leaps and bounds in the way data is held and stored. Certainly adopt as a blockchain. Right now, you can certainly see how that sort of technology could look to better drive the operation of a trust account. So far as you check into a hotel, they log onto the ledger, and immediately then funds start flowing because you sort of checked in or you've checked out. Again, that takes time. That also takes investment. These aren't things that can happen overnight, and we do recognise that does also come with a cost. But as I say, I think the critical thing here is around that sort of the segregation, that separation of those, of the customer's money, and then the behavioural aspect about that money being used for that one purpose, and then needing your funding arrangements to fund, the other aspects of your operation. So, I guess the sort of kind of challenge, slightly Rachel's sort of point about a sort of a drain on liquidity. It depends upon your perspective, what the liquidity is there for in the in the first place. All the sort of the aspects that we're going to be setting out in our consultation, aren't immediately needing transition overnight. And of course, actually, this is a request for industry to come back, and then we'll be setting out further aspects on that during hopefully during the later course of of this year, because this very much is something that we want feedback from across the industry on, to make sure we've gathered all the different perspectives. Because as I say, we're fully aware that there are multiple different business models out there, of which, as they reflect upon different strategies, will impact them in different ways. And so therefore we need to take account of that within the thinking. But also goes back to the comments and the questions earlier around flexible terms and conditions and methods of and timing of payments, and thinking about how all of those things interact in a sort of a revised world of the consumer protection framework.
Very good. John, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Just a couple of things I'd add, and again, broadly very supportive of everything Michael said. I think ABTA's position on that consultation is likely to be one of arguing for a very sort of pro-choice position. Package travel regulations allow for bonding insurance, and indeed trust arrangements to be used, and we think members should be given choice to adopt a method of protection that provides any regulator with the required comfort to be compliant with the law, and to be kind of fair and equitable across different types of business model, different types of participant, whether it's the Department for Business, the BAYS package travel arrangements that we operate, or DFT, CA, ATOL system. We think that's the right approach to give businesses that flexibility and that choice, as long as it gives that kind of fair and equitable protection to the system itself and to the consumer. So I think our position is likely to be built around that kind of design principle of flexibility. And as Rachel said, trust should be one of those options. We have something I very strongly agree with. Michael said is actually this principle of segregation. And I think, participants in the system who operate that discipline should get the benefit and the credit for that. And I think having that right incentive in place will be an important part of the future. We have many members who, behind the scenes, segregate cash in different ways, and that facilitates them getting a much lower cost of bonding from the bonding provider, through to those that actually put in place full cash backing for the bond. And one of the biggest benefits when I speak to those that use that is they don't have all of the management, trustee, trust costs, audit costs of managing a trust. They just simply deposit, I say simply, I'm not saying it's an easy thing, but a much simpler thing, that if you've got to tie that money up, why not just put it on deposit and earn a treasury return on it, but actually not have all those management costs associated with the trust. You simply collateralize the bond, get a very, very low cost of bonding, and you provide the regulator with that bond. So I think there's lots of options to look at here. I feel sometimes as ABTA that we've not won some of the communications war around trust discussion, which I personally found a bit frustrating. I think one of the problems is that trusts are talked about as if they're a homogenous thing, that they all do the same job in the same way. And, you know, that just isn't the case. I think we have to be very careful here with the consumer that they're not misled. You know, I think, as Michael said, when they think, when a consumer hears a phrase like that, they're thinking, well, all of my money is there all of the time until I've received whatever I've bought, i.e. been on the holiday and come home, and then it's released. And that is very rarely the case with the trust arrangements available in the marketplace now. My fundamental concern with some of the arrangements out there is that to make them work for the participants, they allow prepayments to suppliers. But if you only have SAFI insurance in place, so it requires the supplier to have actually become insolvent for that insurance policy to pay back the trust, the sorts of scenarios we've seen in this crisis, in the majority of cases where actually suppliers are not insolvent, they're just also unable or unwilling, or in some cases arguing that they're not legally liable to refund that component back to the tour operator, you're stuck in that position. So the trust not only doesn't have enough money to reimburse the company if the travel organizer were to cease trading, but they're not ever going to receive enough money to do that. And if that travel organizer ceases trading, what happens then? If you don't have that more comprehensive policy of insurance, which you know, I think very few do, what then happens? So bonding and insurance arrangements are not perfect, but ultimately, whether it's through our reserve fund insurance or the Air Travel Trust in the case of ATOL, we've always got the safety net there that we can make good on those scenarios, and the customer gets 100 pence in the pound back. And even through this crisis, you know, not without its difficulty, and you know, in relation to the Air Travel Trust and the ATOL system, obviously, you know, painful period, as Michael said, going back through Monarch and Thomas Cook, and you know, but the system has delivered to the consumer, and the industry has carried all of those costs. So I think we also be really careful here that we don't kind of break or try and fix something that isn't broken. It's been challenged, but it's delivered a really good result for the consumer, and I think we can all be proud of that. And that actually would be my kind of closing remark on this, Jonathan. If you look at the I think something like 2,500 companies that participate between ourselves and the CAA, with us covering, you know, the majority of the large cruise companies, through obviously all the non-licensable packages to the, you know, much greater body of air package holidays that the ATOL system protects. You know, we have delivered the results where there have been failures to the consumer. I think between us, big overlap in the middle, but probably something low 30s of companies that have failed from 2,500 participants. That's actually, I mean, it's been terrible and terrible dealing with it. You know, many of us last 4 years of our life really through Monarch, Thomas Cook, and the you know, best part of 30 failures in the last year. That's what we've been doing. But really, that's not an enormous number given what this industry has been through. And those customers have got repaid on their packages. And, you know, there's a lot to be proud of there. And a lot of the work behind that's been fronted by those listening to this call that have done an absolutely fantastic job guiding folk through those claims processes, particularly challenges of the last year where all of us have had our offices closed and we've been trying to do everything online, which works kind of most of the time, but not 100% perfectly. And, you know, we've worked through that together and looked after customers. I think a lot to be proud of there by our industry as well. Absolutely.
The passion for the industry is definitely there. You wouldn't be able to go through what you've done in this last year, all those travel agents, unless they had a passion for it and a love for it. One area that has been mentioned quite a bit this morning has been about insurance. And we're fortunate to have Ian Hall as Head of Insurance for ABTA here today. And thanks for your patience. That final question to you, Ian. What travel insurance cover is in the market right now?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me on. Well, there's still quite a few out there at the moment. If I just go back to where we were probably sort of this time last year or when the pandemic first hit, there was quite a lot of confusion about what cover was out there, and we did see many insurers pulling out of the market really quickly. Like your Avivas, your LVs, stopped going on sale literally overnight, where people were still looking for insurance potentially for holidays that may have been planned later in the year. What we have seen is, the larger insurers, what we would call the composite insurers, like your AXAs, Aviva have come back in, Mapfre, who are quite large in the travel insurance world, have sort of reacted fairly swiftly to the type of cover people are looking for. So therefore, the cover there is pretty much as it would have been before, but also what they've added in is cover for coronavirus should you get this before you travel. So that could be through a positive test, or you just catch it through a normal route effectively. And also they brought in the fact that if you're taken ill abroad with the virus, then you would be covered for that. But there's a huge caveat around all of these insurers, is that you shouldn't be traveling against FCDO advice. So therefore, if a country is locked down or you can't travel there, then that cover is just simply invalid, because you shouldn't be traveling to that destination. Now, also they're bringing out the traffic light system, so the red, amber, green, and there's some certain conditions around what you need to do to travel for each of those elements. Like red is pretty much off the list completely for most people, but for the green and amber versions, if you have to take that test before you travel, or you have to self-isolate when you return or when you get to the resort, you have to follow those conditions, because otherwise, another thing there, if you go outside of what you're required to do, when it's a governmental guideline, then it becomes invalid. But that said, the cover is there for everything else. So, travel insurance is a fairly low cost insurance when you consider what it can do. It's going to cover you for cancellation due to unforeseen circumstances, such as, jury service, loss of job, where an agent wouldn't pick that up. But when there's a pandemic and the package travel regulations kick in, that does fall back on the agent or whoever's going to cover that. So therefore, it's there for all unforeseen circumstances. One of the, so it's going to be cancellation, it's going to be your baggage. So if you lose, £1,000 worth of items before you get to the airport, or your case goes awry, and then again in resort, the key thing that it will cover you for is medical expenses. That's where the biggest cost of any travel insurance book of claims will be, around medical expenses, certainly when you're in the US. So in terms of what cover is in the market, there is good comprehensive cover out there. Many of the composite insurers have stepped up and given you cover for related coronavirus or COVID-19 situations. We're also seeing that the aggregators seem to be moving, so like your money supermarkets, Go Compare the Market, etc., are moving to a much more quality-based insurer panel. So a lot of the cheaper products are probably going to disappear. Those that have very limited cover will probably find they start to disappear. And certainly in this early stages of recovery, I think we've discussed this within ABTA, that we feel people will be looking for a better quality insurance to make sure that everything's covered. Now, as with any insurance and anything, it's buyer beware, because people have to read policy wording, and nobody does, because they're not the most exciting things. But I think there needs to be a big emphasis on clear sort of communication. So for instance, on the website pages, there needs to be a very clear description of what is and what isn't covered. And also that's reiterated through policy wording. And I think there just needs to be an emphasis on people being asked to make sure they check the cover. They do have 14 days to which to cancel it, and if they don't feel that cover is adequate, or so they can double check before they fully purchase it, or they can get a refund. But also what we are seeing is a lot more flexibility around the insurance as well, where we are seeing trips having to be moved again and again and again, most insurers are being quite lenient with that. So if your trip moves, they'll just simply move the insurance alongside it. So it just keeps sort of shuffling along. The other thing that we are seeing is people are booking insurance much longer in advance as well. I know that, imminent travel isn't there at this moment in time, but we are seeing people book for late summer into autumn and early next year as well. So people are sort of looking at that insurance as a, yes, I must take it, whereas in the past they may have 50-50 on shall I bother, shall I not. I think there's more people wishing to take it and seeing the necessity, which in a way is only a good thing, because the last thing we want is Foreign Office intervention to bring people home when they haven't had cover and resort, and there's a nasty accident or something. But I think key as well is that, insurance is there, or travel insurance is there as a support mechanism to package travel regulations, any other support that's in there from a financial perspective, and it's there for non-recoverable cost. So if you have booked a holiday and you know that, and it can't go ahead due to various reasons, but that trip can be moved on, or you can get a refund through various means, then the insurer will expect you to do that first. If you cannot retrieve that, and there's proof of that, then the insurance would kick in and it would give you that money back that way. So I think really that's about it. I mean, there are, I'd say there's lots of insurance in the market. I mean, there are a few specialists out there that will cover you against FCDO advice. So if you do travel to a country where you're not meant to, there are some specialists that will do that. And that, and also they've been in place for some time, and they maybe cover people like aid workers or oil workers in difficult countries to work in, that sort of thing. So those type of insurances have always been there, but I think there's a few that have come to the fore recently whereby, if the FCDO says you shouldn't be traveling there because there is an epidemic or there's a breakout and you decide you want to go anyway, then there are certain covers out there that will potentially cater for that. But again, it's all down to the fine detail of the policy wording. People will have to read that. And also that's going to be quite an expensive cover to take, because they're taking a fairly hefty risk on you. And it is specialists that will do that. And you'll find that most of those lead back into the Lloyd's market, whereas your sort of mainstream travel insurance is more of a composite market. And there's about 4 or 5 main insurers out there that are sort of probably cover most of the brokers, either directs and also ABTA as type of cover that's in the market.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Like I say, I'm a bit like everybody else. I don't read instructions to put something together, and I don't read travel insurance fine details. So I'm going to have to start doing that in the future.
Well, I think hopefully this latest situation may just make people a little bit more thoughtful about doing that. So
most definitely, they'll have to check the fine detail. Thanks
you.
Thanks for that. I think it's been a very informative morning. Is there anything, John, you would like to wrap up with just before we close?
Yeah, just very briefly, Jonathan, if I may. I think, if I were to summarise what Ian has said in a completely different way, you get what you pay for with travel insurance. And I think if there is one good thing to come out of this, probably is a greater awareness, both in relation to travel insurance, that it's worth spending a bit more money buying a quality policy. And for those of our members that do intermediate insurance that have gone through, that the regulatory loops associated with that, probably no better time than to get better conversion on those sales, because I think there is that general increased awareness of the value of it. And, for others, clearly, folk can't give advice, but just cautioning consumers to be careful what they're looking at. There's a reason some of those policies are as cheap as they are, and generally, however transparent it may or may not be, many have pandemic exclusions. They always have, going right back to to days of SARS, and they don't, and never have, and never will cover those risks. And I just think in closing, from my perspective, you've got a parallel thing going on in relation to our own industry. Consumers understanding the perhaps different responses, different levels of flexibility and care that they've received from different airlines, different platform intermediaries, you know, on social media, on the various sites in our industry. It's been a source of enormous frustration, particularly to frontline retailers. Number of folk coming in and or phoning up and asking them for help with bookings that have not been made through professional intermediaries. Well, that has been deeply frustrating and painful, but it also, I think, points to an opportunity in the future to capitalise on the absolute fantastic added value that everyone listening to this call does offer to consumers. And I think we should all bear that in mind. Been a fantastic job done by all of your readers and your listeners to us today. So thank you to all of them. Thank you, Jonathan.
Well, most definitely, the response or the feeling out there is that travel agents have never been more needed in their life, and it is a brighter picture going forward. Never make up for the last 14 months, but certainly moving forward, the travel agent is the most important person to have on your side these days. Can I just say a big thank you for all your expertise and your knowledge and your time that you brought to us here today. Really appreciate it, and I know that all of Northern Ireland Travel Trade will be delighted to have had you here this morning. So thank you, Rachel, thank you, John, thank you, Ian, and thank you, Michael. And hopefully we'll see you all in Belfast very, very soon live. But thanks for this morning. Thank you. I'd now like to welcome Trudie Clements, Director of ABTA Lifeline. Trudie is ABTA Lifeline's director with over 20 years of experience in aviation and the travel industry. She worked for British Airways for 12 years, managing sustainability at a senior level. There she had responsibility for, among other things, aviation, environmental policy, integrating sustainability into Terminal 5, and was seconded to the then Foreign and Commonwealth Office, where she established a stakeholder engagement process to address sustainable tourism. The UK Sustainable Tourism Initiative evolved into the Travel Foundation, a charity that works in partnership with business and governments so that tourism brings greater benefits for people and the environment. Following BA, Trudie joined ABTA as a sustainability consultant before taking on the task of developing ABTA's charity, transforming it from an old benevolent fund into the charity it is today. Most recently, she managed the charity's rapid response to the collapse of Thomas Cook, with the charity giving out £150,000 in emergency food vouchers alone and raising $450,000 to support the community within a few months. She is now navigating the charity through its toughest period ever, with the travel industry being the first affected by the pandemic and most likely to be the last to recover. With little income and an increase in people seeking support, opportunities to build back better is firmly part of her journey to a sustainable recovery. Good morning, Trudie. Thanks very much for joining us here today. Could you tell us a wee bit about ABTA Lifeline?
Sure, lovely to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. So ABTA Lifeline is your charity. It's there to help people in the travel community when they fall on hard times. So anything from the big to the small, we're happy to consider. And it's anything from emergency food vouchers, crisis grants for those that are really financially struggling. And obviously right now people are. Through to expert advice that we can offer for debt management, housing, benefit advice, which is really crucial right now, as well as we can refer people for mental health and well-being support, because some people are struggling very much so with their mental health. So one size doesn't fit all. We tend to tailor our support to the individual the best we can, showing it the duty of care that it so deserves. But basically, we're here, we're your benevolent fund here to help you in a time of crisis.
Very good. And could you tell me, how do Northern Ireland agents apply for this help?
Sure, they just need to go onto our website and they will see there's a link to how to apply. There's an easy form to fill out, and they just need to upload some supporting documentation. And that documentation is to show that they've worked or are working for an ABTA member, as it's an important benefit of ABTA membership, as you'll be aware. but also some of the issues that they're facing. So if it's a debt issue, we like to see what debt they've got. We need to see current bank statements. We need to see, quotes if it's goods or services or whatever that they might need. So if they're desperate to have an essential goods replaced, like a fridge freezer or a cooker, then certainly if they upload the quotes, that we can take a look at those as well. So very simple process. If anybody struggles with it, all they've got to do is send us an email or give me a call. Very good.
And can you tell me this? How can members, what can members do to support ABTA Lifeline?
At the moment, as you'll appreciate, in fact, we've been incredibly busy since Thomas Cook collapsed back in 2019. I think, we've really come into our own over the last couple of years. And for members, there's two things. The most important thing right now, though, in this current crisis is to spread the word about the level of support that we can give. As I say, from the big to the small, from the crisis grants right through to, as I say, a fridge freezer or a boiler, whatever it might be, we're here to see what we can do to help. And the second thing is, once we start coming out of the recovery, obviously it would be amazing if members could get behind us, support us in any way, hold a fundraising event, do a challenge, do something. And, we, like every other business right now, is struggling with little income. So anything they can give back would be amazing.
That's fantastic. Is there anything else you want to add to the message that you're giving out here today? I mean, that's fantastic, all the different things that you've been saying.
No, just to say that, we have had an enormous amount of people coming to us for support, and it's heartbreaking to hear some of the stories, but some people are put off by the word charity, and we definitely don't want people to be put off by coming to us. Everything is strictly confidential, and we're happy to have a chat on the telephone, talk over email, and support people the very best that we can. As I say, the support is very much tailored to them. So if we can find the right expert advice for them, we will. If we can make a financial reward, then certainly we'll look at it as well. So please come forward. Everything's confidential, and we're very friendly and approachable.
Very good. Like I said, it's at times like this that you have to rely on the family and the big travel family that's out there. And the ABTA Lifeline is absolutely there to support everyone. So thank you very much indeed for taking the time to communicate that to, our agents here in Northern Ireland. And I wish you all the best in the future. And if there's anything we can do to help you, just let us know. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jonathan. Much appreciated.
Hope to catch up soon. Thank you. And now our next view from the travel agent is brought to you by Miles Morgan. From running a market stall from age 15 to 18, sales has always been in Miles's blood. From these beginnings, he started a career in the travel industry, rising from office junior and to sales and marketing director for the UK's largest holiday company. He then turned his back on the corporate life to start his own business with the launch of Miles Morgan Travel in 2006. He has, through his career, been involved in almost every aspect of travel, starting with business travel into retail, IT at Going Places, early .com days at TUI, and sales and marketing throughout most of this time. This is a rare mix of experience few people get to see in their time in the industry. Miles also joined the board of Hayes Travel to help them move from a local regional agency to national giant. During his time with his own business, he has flourished, expanding sales by over 300% and becoming the South West and Wales' leading independent high street travel agent with 18 shops and a turnover of 60 million plus. Good morning, Miles. It's absolutely great to have you here with us today. Really appreciate you taking the time to give your view to our industry here in Northern Ireland. First of all, it's been an incredible 14 months. We were just looking from you, your insight and maybe a message from your experiences over that time.
Oh, well, firstly, thank you for the opportunity to talk. It's greatly appreciated. Lovely to speak to everybody over there. I think probably my underlying thing would be, for the last 14 months, painful would probably be one of the words that would immediately spring to mind, pretty much on every level. Financially, for everybody, it's been incredibly painful, whether you're a business owner like me or an employee on a furlough. It's been incredibly painful financially. It's also been painful from a mental health perspective and a work perspective, because everybody's worked incredibly hard, refunds, amendments, changes, and the tunnel's been very, very long and at times incredibly dark, I think, over the last 14 months. I don't think many people would disagree with that. I think character building is probably another one I would say. And I think, you know, the term sorting the men from the boys is often used, and I think it has been one of those where, you know, you really have had to find yourself during this. And I think the weak have fallen. We've seen that, which is very, very sad. But equally, the strongest survived. And I think, you know, everybody that's watching this as a home worker still in business, or a you know, business owner like myself still watching this, still alive and kicking, should take huge pride in the fact that they are still around. We're still going, and hopefully we'll be here to see the green pastures ahead that undoubtedly will be there for us.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. You know, we've all had to, you know, delve into resources, not just financially, but even in our own selves, and find an inner strength. And that'll hold us in great stead moving forward. I think, you know, I've changed my opinions about a lot of things, both in business and personally and everything else. And, you know, I think there is a positive road ahead, and we can take, you know, what we've learned from that. If we can come out of this the other end, I think that's the biggest achievement that we can ever have. So, yeah, I really, really agree with you. What are the areas that you feel, you know, our Northern Ireland agents could most benefit from in this kickstart to recovery? You know, people have said that, you know, the travel agent is probably more important now than ever from a public perspective. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I mean, you always look for positives and opportunities. And I think whenever we have anything happen in the world, particularly something as huge as this, my mindset switches to looking for opportunities, because when things change, there are always opportunities for the bold and the brave and the people who want to grab them. And I think what we've seen over the last 14 months is that online has been exposed for what it actually is, which is a channel that's perfectly great for booking with, but when things go slightly pear-shaped or wrong, it isn't as user-friendly and as easy to deal with as walking down the road to a high street agent, or having a home worker that pops around your house, or you meet for a coffee or whatever. And I think, you know, if we're looking for opportunities coming out the back of this, despite the fact that, for me, I think the high street, as we've all seen, is under huge, huge pressure. I personally feel, and I'm primarily a retail high street business, I've never felt more confident in our future, because I think people have learned that actually, you know, if you want a cheap flight to somewhere, Malaga, wherever, it's fine. But as soon as you want anything else, even a package holiday, you need somebody to look after you. And I think what we'll find at the other end of this pandemic is a whole host of people that will come back to high street agent or home worker and want to re-engage with us again, simply because the other side has been exposed for what it is, which hasn't been a great experience for many. And we've seen that getting refunds has been incredibly hard. And I've no doubt that people watching this have worked damn hard over the last 14 months to secure refunds for customers. And, you know, if you like the way I see it, it's kind of shortly we'll be enjoying payback time for all of that hard graft and effort everybody put in, where we see people coming back to us, we see people recommending us and going, yeah, absolutely. You know, is it the cheapest to book with them? No, it's not. But actually, it's only a small amount more, if anything at all. And my God, it is worth it. And this pandemic has exposed what the proper value is of booking with a high street agent or a home worker. It's immense. It really is. Absolutely.
I mean, I know from my own personal experience, because I do book through travel agents. I don't book online myself. And the fact is that they were there at the end of the phone. The support was there. The reassurance was there. And I keep on saying the communication builds the trust, you know, for that moving forward. And I think you touched on a really important point there. I think, you know, what I've talked about is where the opportunity is. And so the challenge for us all really is we need to make sure that we reach customers to tell them how great we are. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, whatever business you are, you know, who is your customer? Where are they looking? You know, because we've still got customers that read newspapers, amazingly, and listen to the radio, watch TV. So we still do some of that marketing. Equally, have they moved on to Facebook? Are they on Instagram? You know, have they actually moved to TikTok? You know, but what I would say to everybody is
you need to make sure you still go out there and tell the story and tell as many people as possible you're targeting just how great you are. I think if we sit back and wait for something to happen, we will see the bounce without a doubt. But if we really want to press the accelerator button, we need to get out there to our audience, tell them how fantastic we are through the channel, the most appropriate channel to find them, whichever that one is in the modern day.
Yeah, it's that whole thing. We're open for business, and you know, they have been open, and everyone has been open. And I'm sure, as you say, you've had to facilitate your customers with refunds and rebooks and everything else, and people know that that's been going on. But the fact is, you have to say, right, we're now open. This is it. We're good to go. And there is a long way to go in regard to you know, clarity, in regard to the traffic light system and the PCR testing and everything else. But I mean, the moves are afoot to make that happen as quickly as it possibly can. What's your feelings about the task force report and what has come out of that, if you don't mind?
I might be slightly controversial in what I say. I think they've come in for an awful lot of flack. I probably don't follow that personally. I believe that the decisions they made are right. I think in terms of the PCR testing, which is probably the most controversial thing, I understand why they brought it in. And I think the worst possible thing that could happen to our industry is a variant is brought back from Corfu, from Mallorca or somewhere like that. That would be catastrophic for us. So I am wholly supportive of anything that actually really de-risks that. So if that's the case, then this boils down to the lunatic cost of PCR testing. And already we've seen it go from £120 to £60. We know in countries in the EU, it's 20 odd pounds. So if we can get it down to 25, £30, then for me, that is a massive boost to have that reassurance that we will not be bringing variants back, which for the industry as a whole, I see as the only banana skin. And if we build back slowly, which is the way things are looking, but we build back in a sustainable fashion where we don't get hit with a variant and a banana skin, then we've every reason to be really positive. And I think the countries, we're yet to find out the countries that are going to go green. We've all got a feeling on what they're going to be, obviously. But for me, again, with those, I'm quite happy if that list isn't huge from day one on the 17th of May. I want it to be sustainable, and I want it to be something we can build on over the summer and have a sustainable start that doesn't have banana skins, because last year's death by 1,000 cuts was not something I don't think anybody wants to revisit. It was not an enjoyable summer. It was a very stressful summer.
Yeah, the hokey cookie, as they call it, you know, in out type thing, you know, just didn't work for anyone. Whether that be the travel agent or whether that be the customer themselves. And as you say, that sustainable growth is probably the best way to go, slowly but surely. 100% agree with the PCR cost. I mean, it's incredible what they're charging at the present time when you can see what it can be. But you know, it's the first steps to recovery, you know, and this is what this event is all about, the kickstart to recovery and having that positivity and looking at it. And I know you are the same as me. You're always looking at the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. And that's definitely the way we should be looking forward. So yeah, I think your comments are very valid. Last question, really, very simple one. Where will be the first place you're going on holiday?
Well, I'm pleased to say I'm booked already. So so there you go. And actually, it's really interesting. So I'm booked for early June to go to Rhodes. And so I'm kind of looking at that going, because from a personal opinion, I think we can see, you know, some Caribbean destinations will hopefully go green on the 17th. I think all things point towards Portugal potentially going green, but it has links to Brazil, which might actually set it back. We've yet to see that one. Malta's in great shape. We then move on to Greece, where, you know, infection rates are starting to drop in Greece. They've announced that they're going to vaccinate every worker in tourism before the start of the summer season. So that would almost tick the government box on that. So my departure for early June is in the balance, but I'm as ever with my life, I'm looking optimistically forward that it's gonna happen, because if it does, it will be wonderful. But I think, you know, as I mentioned, I can see certainly by summer, by July and August, my personal opinion is everywhere in terms of short haul will be open. You know, the Spains, the Croatias, all of those main big destinations will be open. The States, which was looking in such a bad state, has flipped itself around completely. So we should be optimistic about America as well. And I think, if we wind back, your original question about the 14 months, it's been a tortuous route. As I mentioned, a long, dark tunnel, very, very dark at times. What we now have, which we've never had, is a proper roadmap. Maybe not as quick as we would like, but actually it's a roadmap back for our industry. And all we need to do is just make sure nothing trips us up along the way. And then I think we should be really optimistic. We will see a bounce. There's no doubt about it, because all of these people that haven't traveled for the last few years, they've either got a bit more money to spend on their holiday. Maybe they might do 2 instead of 1 because they've missed out. So the look overall for us is really, really positive. And I think everybody watching this should be optimistic in terms of our future, careful looking after the cash over the next few months, because obviously not that many people will be traveling. So cash coming in will still be tight. But on the longer term game, I think we've every reason to be really excited about the future.
Very good. And of course, you booked your holiday with a travel agent and a really good operator who has flexible terms that if anything happens, you can move it to another destination.
Can't book it anywhere else.
Good on yourself. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I can't wait until we can get you over live to Belfast to one of our events that we have over here and chat a bit more. But thank you very much indeed for your time.
Yeah, great. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. I would like to highlight tomorrow's session, which is devoted to the new Association of Northern Ireland Travel Agents, who were instrumental in highlighting the plight of our travel agents locally, resulting in a tailor-made grant. And tomorrow we talk about the next steps. Our panel will be Damien Murphy, the interim chair of ANITA, Joanne Dewey, president of the Scottish Passenger Agents Association, Brenda Morgan, MBE, chair of the Northern Ireland Tourism Alliance, and Luke Petherbridge, ABTA Director of Public Affairs. I really look forward to this, and thank you for joining us today.